Hello, Holy Happy Hour, Batman. It's 5 p.m. Eastern Time on a Friday, and that means we're here with the Happy Hour stream live on That Gamer Priest on Twitch. I am Ben. That Gamer Priest, and I'm having some technical difficulties today, so I apologize for that. In fact, I just got an alert saying my internet's unstable, so that's what you want when you're hosting a stream. But hey, we're here, we're live, and it is happy hour on a Friday. I've got a special guest coming up in just a few minutes. Michael Mornard, my good friend, is here with me. I'm excited about that, but hold that thought. I'll introduce him in a moment. For right now, I just want to say welcome to you all on this Friday happy hour. I have a drink I want to introduce to you for this week. Even before that, just a couple housekeeping notes. I'm really excited because we have a special guest next week, which is Derek Geek Preacher White, who happens to be a friend of Michael's. Will probably come up in our conversation today. So we got 2 weeks of people who've been around the gaming community and gaming for a very long time, and that's really exciting. And so my drink in a moment is kind of themed around that exact concept. And we also, then I'm going to be taking 2 weeks off for family reasons. I've got a family wedding that I am officiating as the priest. And so I've got 2 weeks that are going to be off for the stream for that. And then I'm extremely excited because I'll be back on May 28th with James D'Amato, the founder and creator of the One Shot Network and the One Shot podcast and campaign and many other things, is coming on the show. Huge guest, probably the biggest guest I could have thought to book, honestly. And I'm really excited. And that's, again, on May 28th. We're going to have James D'Amato here on Holy Happy Hour Batman. Very excited. So that's my little bit of housekeeping that I wanted to let you all know about. And then, so now, before we bring Michael on, I do have a drink for this week. So as I said, this drink is inspired by the fact that we have Michael on the show. I titled this The Old School Gamer. You can see the recipe card up there on the screen. The Old School Gamer is a take on an old-fashioned, which hopefully no one takes offense at. But it's actually really good. I'm drinking it now, and it's awesome. So what I did was I took this bottle of New Liberty Distillery right in Philadelphia, their own Millstone 2-year age single barrel straight rye whiskey. Oh, you can't see it because of my virtual background, but there it is. From New Liberty Distillery right in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 2 years in charred new oak barrels. It's a straight rye. And what I did was I took the New Liberty Distillery's sour cherry liqueur, simple syrup, and cocoa bitters. So it's kind of a cherry chocolate old-fashioned. And then put the rye in there, stirred it up with a large ice cube or a couple of small ice cubes, and use orange zest to garnish. And the flavors are awesome. And so it's my take this week on it's not really an old-fashioned because it's got that cherry liqueur and that cocoa bitters. But it's sort of my take on an old-fashioned. It's really good. I was super happy. I tested several versions of it. Really happy with how it came out. And so now it'll go down in my record of cocktails that I made with Michael's face there on the Old School Gamer recipe card. So it is. We got a chat from Wormies there in the chat. Old fashioned sounds good. It is really good, and I really can't recommend enough this Millstone 2-year. They're not paying me to say this, from New Liberty Distillery. My friends there at New Liberty. This is their Millstone. You can buy this on their website right now. It's Millstone 2 years aged straight rye. If you're in Pennsylvania, I think they'll ship it to you. Super good. Highly recommend. Any rye will do for the recipe. All right, so let's take away the recipe card and introduce our guest here. You've just seen his face on the recipe card. My guest today is someone who is a friend of mine for years, but somebody who has been around the gaming community for a very long time. And so Michael Mornard is sort of famously, I read on, if you search for him online, you'll find that he is credited as being the only known person to be a regular player in Dave Arneson, Gary Gygax, and M.A.R. Parker's campaigns in the early days of D&D. Whether he'll tell us whether or not that's true. That's a pretty amazing, a really amazing credit to have. So we're going to talk about him, though. We're going to talk about life, spirituality, his theology, because I actually knew Michael first as being a seminary graduate with me. So let's go ahead and, again, with the magic of the internet, bring Michael here on the screen. So welcome, Michael, to That Gamer Priest Holy Happy Hour, Batman. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks, Ben, and thanks for inviting me. And for happy hour, I have Dogfish Head 60-minute IPA. So
Oh
that's
wow.
my particular thirst quencher on this sunny South Dakota afternoon.
That's awesome. I love that beer. That's a great IPA. It's so funny to me that you're drinking Dogfish Head, which is like local to where I am, it being out of Delaware, but you're all the way up in South Dakota. So I didn't even know that Dogfish Head made it that far.
Yeah, it does. And I'm drinking it for the purest of reasons
Yeah,
because there were some local brews available, but
sure.
Dogfish Head had a $5 off coupon.
Oh, there you go. Purest of reasons for sure. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on Holy Happy Hour, Batman.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
So Jeremy's reaction in the chat there, South Dakota, yeah. So maybe we'll get to how you ended up in South Dakota, but let's see. A good place to start is probably the beginning. So like I said, you are credited as being the only, at least by some people on the internet, as the only known person to be famously in those three GM's games. Is that a true? Is that true? Is you the only known person that was in those three? Yeah,
Yes, yes, that is absolutely true.
that's wild.
And in 1973, I moved from Lake Geneva up to Minneapolis to go to college.
Yeah,
So that was when I transferred from Greyhawk to Dave Arneson's Blackmore. And Phil Barker, Professor M.A.R. Barker, was the faculty advisor at the University Gaming Club in 1973. So, yes, indeed.
that's just the most. It's just such amazing history. Yeah, wow. It's like where do you even jump in to unpack that? But I, there's all three of those people. Man, what interesting GMs to play with. Did you have a favorite campaign of the three from back then? If you had to pick, or maybe you don't have a favorite. Maybe it's like picking your favorite child.
Yeah, they were all so different. Um, I don't know. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Blackmore was definitely the most brutal of the three,
Okay.
and I mean Greyhawk was not a particularly safe place,
Right.
but Blackmore was even worse.
So I actually read a story preparing for this that I hadn't heard from you before. I don't think, or if I did, I've forgotten. Maybe we had it over a beer or something, and I forgot about it. But I read that you famously made it as a first level wizard to level 3 in the. Well, you can tell the story, I guess.
Yeah, it was actually, to be technical, it was first level magic user
Uh huh.
because that was back when the word wizard applied to an 11th level magic user.
I see.
And yeah, I was first level, and I was having no luck, and like I don't know how many times I'd hire a bunch of men at arms, and I'd go down into the dungeon, and I'd come out, barely alive, and the rest were dead. And it got to the point where I couldn't. Yeah, I'm trying to hire men at arms, and they're like, no, no, you can't pay me enough because all my buddies never came back. So I had heard about an entrance down into the third level. So it's like, okay, I guess I have to do it myself. So, me with half a dozen daggers, a lantern, some torches, oil, just all by my lonesome as a first level magic user. And some people don't like having to choose your spells in advance. But to me, that's the best part of being a magic user, is figuring out your loadout in advance. First level magic user, you get one spell, and after about 15 minutes of going back and forth, I decided on Charm Person, because I was going on the third level rather than the first level. And the first thing I ran into was a 5th level chaotic fighter who comes after me. And so I'm like, Charm Person. And fortunately, he failed his saving throw. So then I'm adventuring with a 5th level fighter. And that was a pretty good adventure because
So yeah,
I could provide his backup. Like at one point, he's fighting a giant lizard. So while he's fighting it, I got behind it. I still had a dagger. So I was helping and came out of that with enough gold to make it up, well, according to 1 point below third level, but finding that, I leveled up 2 levels in one adventure by a careful choice of spells, a little bit of throw, and knowing when to engage and when to stand back and let the.
So let me ask you a question. What would you call the D&D that you all played in those early games? Because if I'm right, it's technically not even first edition, right? It's pre first edition.
Yeah, it was just I the original D&D, the original.
Right.
Back, hang on 10 seconds.
Yeah, go get it. Go get it. Yeah, get the book. So I have and I apologize, folks, for a little bit of choppiness on our Zoom call there, but I have a copy of the 0 edition book, but I don't think it's in my house. I think it's over basically somewhere else, but it's not here, so I couldn't grab my copy to show people. But I have a reprint. There it is. That's the one. I have a reprint of that, Michael. But it's not here. I don't have my copy here. Yep. It's somewhere else, so I couldn't show everybody. But
yep, and this is first edition, first printing. January 1974, handed to me by Gary Gygax himself, and personalized by Dave Arneson.
Can you read it for us? Yeah, go ahead.
The Triple Threat Man. Yes, it says, Mike to the Triple Threat Man, Dave Arneson, and the date.
That's awesome.
October of 2004.
Oh, okay.
Referring, of course, to Big Rock, Blackmore, and Tekaba.
Yeah. So I had the pleasure of getting to play that version of D&D with you in seminary. So that's how I know Michael is. We went to seminary together, so we knew each other in the religious world. And I don't even know. I couldn't remember. I thought about this a lot. How did I find out that you played D&D? I couldn't remember. But I found out at some point in the course of some. Do you happen to remember? I don't. You may not. I don't know how it came up.
I think it came up at some point because a lot of the folks at seminary were video gamers of some level or other. Thing came up, and I remember his name. There were several Tolkien fanatics, and so there's actually a fair amount of geek culture going on at seminary.
There was,
and somewhere in all that blend, it bubbled up to the surface.
Sure. But you ran a game there in New York City for some local folks. I was the only person from the seminary who got to play. It was a huge honor that I got to play with you running, but it was such a completely different experience. So it was for people who are out there and have played D&D and have never played one of these early editions, it is just nothing like D&D 5th edition or 3rd edition or even 2nd edition. It's just completely different. And one of the things that was really interesting is I actually didn't absorb any of the rules because you as the GM really managed most of the rules. But it was kind of cool because I could really just play. And I didn't have to really worry too much about the rules. And you would do the rolling for us. And I could really one of the things I remember, I'm curious what you would describe as being the big differences between then and now with these games. For me, it was very focused on, it was simple. It was very, very simple for me. Maybe the rules were complex, I don't know. But my experience of it was that the game was really simple. I was a dwarf. I probably had an axe, and we got trapped in a room and we almost burned to death. And I famously broke the door down and saved everybody. A story that Michael still tells to this day. And but the fact that it was so simple was kind of what made it easy to be memorable, because you really were focused on breaking a door down in the dungeon to save your lives or something, rather than your story about the charmed person, I think is kind of like that too. You got to choose your spell and then it changed everything.
Well, and the original edition, and it says this somewhere, it's a set of guidelines and suggestions that you can use to build a game.
Mm-hmm.
And what wasn't in the rules, you know, it was written mostly with the referee in mind.
Right.
And the referee invented the world, and the expectation is you knew your world. And the first couple, until I started playing in October of 1972, the rules weren't published until January 1974. And because that was the way Gary ran, just tell me what you want to do.
Yeah.
And tell me why it's a reasonable thing to do. And it requires a high level of trust, but I think it's very much, I think it's the best way to play.
Yeah.
A younger friend of mine back in Minneapolis, hi Brian, cut his teeth on 3rd edition.
Mm-hmm.
And after playing in my campaign for about 6 months or so, he, just like you, went out and got the PDF reprints.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him why. And he said, because the way you run the game, if I want to sneak up behind the guard and knock him out, I say that's what I want to do. You roll the dice, it happens or it doesn't, and we get on with the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my experience of playing that edition with you, the closest other thing I've had to that experience is actually playing a game like Dungeon World, the Powered by the Apocalypse system fantasy game, and that's like the closest thing to that, where it's what Dungeon World does though, and then we can move on from this sort of topic. But what Dungeon World does though is it makes it easier I think on the referee or GM, DM, whatever, too. Whereas there's really not a lot, like and one of the other differences is that in Powered by the Apocalypse, the DM never rolls, the players do all the rolling. But the simplicity of it and the focus on the narrative is very similar between the two experiences. So the feel of playing them both, that's the closest, not playing any D&D game, but playing Dungeon World.
Well, and I played in about a 6-month Dungeon World.
Okay.
Game here. And, my comment was, with the exception of a few things, it actually was very reminiscent. And in fact, you could easily, I could easily modify Dungeon World to run my D&D game in.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that, success with complication. Well, it sounds like a roll on the Wandering Monster table to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of, in terms of feel, there is a lot of similarity.
So do you think that, like, in some ways the pendulum it's a thing where the pendulum swings back and forth and it's sort of just swung back now towards?
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't try to keep current in the gaming world much anymore.
Yeah. Like purposefully, like you avoid it, like if you can, is that?
No, it's just, I have an edition of D&D that I like.
Yes.
I
sure.
see no reason, I don't feel it's lacking anything that I need to fix. So I see no reason to try something, to try a later edition. I will play a game, but in terms of what I would run or what I would spend my money on, I have something I'm satisfied with. And also at the University of Minnesota War Game Club, from 1973 to 1987 or 88, we tried everything that would hold still. And, part of it is, after enough years of that, I realized, probably by the late 70s, that the actual rule system is about the least important part of the whole process. But one thing I did notice, simultaneous with my D&D game, same bunch of people, we were also on and off running a Star Wars D20 game. And I was one of the people who would occasionally take a turn as the referee there, which there's an awesome story about how I realized I still had it. But anyway, one thing I noticed reffing Star Wars versus D&D, in D&D, I'd, here's the situation, and people would start talking to each other. And with Star Wars D20, and I've noticed this with Pathfinder too, you set up the situation, and everybody looks at the character sheet. And it's, it's all, what doohickey or skill or something do I have that applies in this situation? And I personally, this is simply a matter of taste, I find that a less satisfying way to play.
Yeah, so I totally agree, and I would say that's, again, I think one of the things I like about Powered by the Apocalypse a lot. And what I tried to do, I just recently ran a masks campaign for our podcast Apon Plays. That's now going to be its own spin-off podcast called Delinquent Comics. And when I was running masks, I really tried to push my players to tell me what they wanted to do. And if they ever lean towards like, okay, I want to use this power and that, or this move, they're not even called powers in that game, they're called moves, but they wanted to use a certain move, I would say like, well, tell me what you want to do. Like, what do you want to do? And then then we can figure out which role it is, like which move it is. But what do you want to do?
That's one thing. And hardcore rules-bound gamers have a lot of trouble with that. And it was the same thing with, when we played Dungeon World, I'm going to do a hack and slash. It's like, no, that's not what you do. So I would say things like, I'm going to hit him on top of the head so hard he poops in his pants. Okay,
Right, exactly. Well, now that I'm thinking about it, like I don't even really dislike 4th edition D&D. Like I enjoyed it when it was out and I played it, and I would play it again probably if I given the right conditions, but I wouldn't go for it. But anyway, one of the things I was just thinking about though, that's so different that I realized right now about that edition of D&D is that like it was the almost antithesis of that, where like the game system itself really encouraged you to think of like, okay, what powers do I have left to use? So you really were focused on your character sheet and what you had, and you really weren't focused almost at all on, like just the narrative. Like, okay, this is what I want my character to do, and then I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's just two different ways, I guess, of playing.
And that's part of the impetus behind what, I don't know if I'm going to gain much traction with it, but in the 17th and 18th century, the Prussian army developed Kriegspiel for training officers. It means war game. And they kept getting more and more rules and more tables. And so in the late 18th century, a Prussian general came up with what he called free Kriegspiel, where there is no text with authority. All authority is in the umpire, because the umpire was an experienced officer. And so and it depended a lot less on rules and a lot more on the knowledge of the referee. And I'm trying to get people thinking about role-playing gaming in terms of free Kriegspiel, to take away this, and I've been seeing this for 20 years. It's like, oh, it's so hard to run a game because, first you have to know all these rules. And no, you have to know how your world works, which is not the same as knowing rules.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons there's no coup de grace rules in the original D&D.
Okay.
Because, to all of us, it was self-evident, if somebody's tied up, bound and gagged, strapped down to a table, and you take a two-handed battle axe and hit it in the middle or forehead with it, they're dead. If you cut somebody's head off, they're dead. And I think one of the best examples of this, and I don't know, say hi to Freddie.
Yeah, hi, Freddie.
I don't know which forum this was, but they're talking about, movie version Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring near the end, at the death of Aragorn, and then I guess one of the orcs was a named character in the script.
Okay.
And it's like, describe the fight between Aragorn and whoever this last orc out of that batch of orcs. Describe this fight using D&D terms. And in the the 3rd edition version, it's all this blah blah, on and on and on and on and on. And I said, okay, here's how I would describe it in original edition D&D. Orc gets initiative. Orc rolls an 18. Orc hits Aragorn for 4 points of damage. Aragorn rolls back, being a 5th level fighter. He rolls a 14, a 19, a 17, an 8, and an 11. He hits 3 times, does 13 points of damage to the Orc. Orc is dead.
Oh, you lost your camera. That's a first on. Did an Orc attack? Is that what?
No, that was Mr. Freddy Fluffbuns crawling behind the monitor for some reason because he's a demented kitty.
There we go. I think you got it back in the right spot. Oh, it fell again. Oh no. Yeah. Well, there's a first time for everything on the show.
I'm very fond of our cats, but sometimes they're crazy.
I hear you.
What are you doing back there, Mr. Lunatic?
Well, you know what? Listen, my dog it's taken everything we have. It's a full family effort to do this stream on Fridays because our dog is 6 months old and she's like in her I'm a rebellious teenager phase. I'm going to bark up a storm. It's like my wife is like, in order for me to stream, Mel has to like make sure the dog is not over there barking, and it's a full family effort in order to do this.
Yeah. Well, and I remember one of our cats we used to have, if she did something wrong and I'd yell at her, she'd run across the room, jump onto the hassock, flop over on her side, and put her paws under her chin like this and look up at me. Like, see, I'm cute.
I almost put the picture of you with the cat that you sent me on the recipe card for the drink, but I decided it was a little overkill, and I stuck with it.
Well, which one? The one where I'm looking at the cat, or the one where the cat's sticking her butt in my face?
Can't decide because they're both too good. But it's funny. I thought so. We were talking a bunch about D&D, which is great. I thought maybe that we were going to end up having quite a different conversation. Because I realized that I know way more about your history playing, in these games and being a part of the game community than I do your actual journey, like how you ended up in seminary. So with me, I mean, and of course part of that I know of course has to do with your wife, but Gene aside, what I didn't know is for you whether geekdom or God and Christianity came first. Did you grow up in the faith, the faith?
I grew up in a small town, in a small northern Wisconsin Roman Catholic town.
Okay.
And pre-Vatican II days, so and it was a small town, like 600 people. And if you weren't in church on Sunday, sometime in the next week, Father Haymauer would get a hold of you and ask why you weren't in church.
Am I allowed to still do that, or does that not work anymore? It doesn't work anymore.
So, yeah. So, so that was that. And so I've always been a person of faith to some extent. And then at age 12 or 13, I actually, because this is the way my demented brain works, I actually said, okay, I'm going to sit down and decide if I believe in God. And I thought about it, said, well, God, however you think of it, there's an awful lot of assumptions you have to make. But I thought, well, okay, what about if you're not, but if there is no God, well then, the entire 13.5 billion year history of the universe is nothing but a series of coincidences. And I thought, okay, I can believe anything before I can believe that. And I thought about it and said, yeah, that's true. As Sherlock Holmes said, eliminate the impossible, and whatever is less, however unlikely, must be the truth.
Or Mr. Spock,
Yeah. Actually, that is a direct quote from Sherlock Holmes.
Right. It just also happens to be used by Star Trek in, I think, Undiscovered Country. Anyway.
It's just, the point being, I still cannot believe it's all just an immense chain of coincidence, so the truth must be something else. And then most of the rest of my life has been spent in the quest of finding some way of putting it together that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you put it in terms of a quest. I don't know if that's...
Well, yeah, not on purpose, but yeah, it just sort of popped out, so I guess. Because I remember even at a very young age, like, 7 or 8, people would say things about religion, and I'd think to myself, that doesn't make sense. And, it's like, I knew it had to make sense somehow.
So you were thinking theologically even at that young age.
Though I did not know it, at
Right.
somewhere around 8 or 9, I became interested in systematic theology. Thank you, Archbishop Peter Carnley.
For our viewers who don't know, that is who taught systematic theology to us at General Seminary, who was the former Archbishop of Australia, right? Is that right? Anglican Church of Australia?
I have never worked so hard for an A- or been so happy to get an A- in my entire life, but I loved every second of the class.
So how did you end up in seminary? How did that end up happen? What's the story of that?
Well, Gene received the call. And
Yeah, so for folks who don't know, why don't you maybe do a little bit
of...
Yeah,
okay, 30-second précis.
Yeah.
My wife was an opera singer and had retired because as she said, your shelf life is limited. And one day, walked up to me as I'm walking from the family room into the kitchen and said, "I think I've been called to become a priest." I said, "Oh, you'd be really good at that." Well, and 5 years later, there we are in New York at the General Theological Seminary. And I went with her partly because I didn't want to be separated, and partly because it was a chance to live in New York for 3 years. And I really dug that idea. And after a year or so, actually it took less than a year, but several months of hanging around, I realized that the conversations I was having with Jean and her classmates were more interesting than just about anything else I'd ever done in my life. And that's what got me thinking about it. And then one day I was in the office in the West Building, I think, and there's this flyer about master's degree in congregational development. It's like, Eureka, which is Greek for "this bathwater's too hot." That's a Doctor Who joke. Gotta maintain the geek content here.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not that hard to do. So yeah, well, one thing I didn't even know about your own story, but I just learned. I hope you don't mind me outing you about this. Is that now you're discerning your own call, like post seminary.
Yep, and
I'd love to hear about that.
Well, and I am now, like, long time ago, I'm back at seminary even. I got this feeling that I wanted to do more than just be a lay person or a volunteer. And it's a non-canonical piece of literature, but the first chapter is wonderful. The Acts of Thomas talks about, Jesus sending Thomas to India. And at one point, Thomas points to Jesus and says, "I am this man's slave." And that really resonated with me, that notion of, I am completely, I belong to this person completely. And I have felt that pull for years and years. And, things happen in the rest of the world. So I've actually been trying to get started on the path for quite some time, but there have been several fits and starts, including our previous bishop retiring a few years ago, and before that, just it never got to the top of the stack.
Sure.
And then, COVID hit, and that sort of threw everything into a heap. And, I just things have finally, gotten settled again to the point where not only my life, but also our diocese is starting the process again.
Yeah. So was there something that, like, you decided to go through this process of discerning a call to be a deacon in the Episcopal Church, which is, for folks who might not know this watching, is the church that I'm a priest in, a clergy person in, and the kind of seminary we went to together. But you decided that you felt called to be a deacon. Was there something that did the diaconal call come from somewhere? Was there some event that made you think diaconate is where I feel called, drawn toward?
Well, I feel called to more than just being a lay person, and I don't know if my call is going to end up in the diaconate or not, because that's why it's discernment. But I feel no call whatsoever to preside at the sacraments. So I'm pretty sure that whatever I'm being, it's not the priesthood. Because the whole, when COVID hit and there was nobody in church but Gene and me and the camera, I was perfectly willing to do the readings, to assist, to help set the table for the Eucharist, to attend and assist her. But at no point did I ever have even the tiniest glimmering of feeling like I should be doing this. And Jim Jelinek, Bishop Jim Jelinek, way back in like 2009, said that the more orders of ordination you go through from deacon to priest to bishop, the more freedom you give up.
That's interesting.
And that's tying back to the Acts of Thomas. It's like I feel the need to give up some of my freedom to God. Is the best way I can describe it.
Okay. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? For give up freedom. What does that mean for you?
Well, recently our diocese had a meeting on the whole process, and I think it was our Archdeacon Paul Snavy, but I can't swear to it, who said the biggest difference between a deacon and a lay person is the lay person can say, no, I don't feel like doing this. Whereas, okay, here in Christian Ministerial Association, there's a food giveaway. And, our church participates, and, as a lay person, I can participate, and it's a good thing. As a deacon, if this is something our church does, I participate, period. And if it sounds vague, that's because it is.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about it, and I'm thinking about how, even beyond that very specific kind of example you just gave, just in general, what you're talking about when you become ordained is you're talking about taking vows, right? You're becoming vowed. Yeah. You're taking, specific vows to live in a certain way. We don't relate to vows well in our modern society because we don't really take them very often. They don't really, I don't think we really relate exactly to vows in modern society.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. In the Book of Common Prayer, it's, the office of the deacon is to bring the church out into the world and the world into the church. And one of the best examples I've ever heard of how this actually works was after Hurricane Katrina down in Gulfport, Mississippi. There's huge efforts going on that the churches were involved in. Ended up, there are times when you need to know where the priest is, especially when there's still people suffering and injured. So the priests stayed in the churches to be available, and it was the deacons who were out in the community, there's a deacon running these teams that are doing demolition and cleanup, and there's a deacon running these teams that are doing food and clothing giveaways. And they're in communication with the priest. The priest is not sitting around doing nothing, but the priest has to be someplace where, okay, we need a priest now, and you got to know where the priest is. And that is one of the most clear-cut examples I've seen of the difference. And I mean, God forbid there's ever a natural disaster here. I hope I'm never, but just that sort of thing. The deacon is the hands and feet of the church.
Well, you did sort of live through a natural disaster recently, right? I mean, and even right now with the pandemic, going on. I mean, it's not the same as it's a different kind of disaster than a hurricane or something, an earthquake, but it's
Science is real. Vaccines work.
Is there a lot of vaccine resistance up in South Dakota? Yeah. Right.
I don't know if you can find. Our governor refused through the whole thing to put any restrictions on.
Right.
But
Well, I mean, there is a similarity between that when we were talking about this idea of giving up freedom. But I was thinking as you're talking about that, like, how you accidentally, not intentionally said you were on a quest to find God, right? You used that quest language. And then I was just thinking, you're talking about, the idea of being bound by vows is such a familiar concept to people who play D&D. Like, if you play D&D, I feel like if you read fantasy genres or whatever, you're pretty familiar with this idea of actually of like being vowed to a quest or in service of someone else. And we do use that language in church in talking about a lot, in relationship to God.
Well, and I think part of it is it's a power dynamic that we don't know about anymore.
Yeah.
If
Right.
you've seen the old movie The Four Musketeers with Charlton Heston as Cardinal Richelieu and Christopher Lee as the Comte de Rochefort, there's a scene in there, I don't remember what Rochefort says something that annoys Richelieu, and Richelieu says, "On your knees, little man, before your master." And Rochefort just drops to his knees, and it's clear in that moment he is seconds away. He can be dead in 5 minutes if that's what Richelieu wants. All Richelieu would have to do is pick up a piece of parchment and a pen and write, "Execute Rochefort immediately," sign it, hand it to the guard, and it's over. And that sort of absolute power,
right?
We're just not familiar with anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think even in most religious contexts in North America, my context, I should say, what I mean to say is in most of my experience of religion, specifically Christian religion in North America, that kind of power dynamic is actually not present most of the time. Maybe you get an idea of obedience, but you certainly don't get a lot of numinous or awe or wonder in the fear of God kind of that's largely absent.
Yeah, if we, a bishop has many roles to play. If we thought more seriously about it when the bishop is acting as the vicar of Christ, that is such an incredible thing to say. It's just and most people just, I don't think, have any idea at all of even the implications of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think most bishops don't get me wrong, I'm glad most bishops don't act like Cardinal Richelieu. I think that's a good thing.
Right.
But the potential, and it's the same thing when we talk about Christ the King. It's blah 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 blah. We have no idea what we're saying.
Sure. Although I would like to say that I think that when we talk about Christ the King, so I think that and wow, this is the most specifically Christian theology we've gotten on this happy hour stream yet, I would say. But I think that we have to let him define, right, what that kingness looks like, not human kings. Like, it needs to be the other way around, right? Like, who Jesus is needs to define that for us, not our concept of
Yes.
kings based on
Yes.
people. And so, where the kingness of Jesus looks like the servant ministry, and it's going back to the deacon thing, maybe a little bit, but the servant ministry of the one who the teacher who gets down on his knees and washes the feet of his disciples and says, love each other as I've loved you.
In our culture, if we think of the king, we think Queen Elizabeth II,
sure,
who wishing her all well. I don't know how much actual power the 20th or 21st century monarch of England actually had.
Right.
As opposed to, Louis the 14th, the Sun King, where the king's word wasn't. The king's word was law. And we just can't relate to that. It's too different.
Yeah. So let me ask you. So pivoting here, I because of time, I want to, and there's more I want to cover than we have time for. I want to ask you. You've got your Gary Con shirt on, and I want to talk a little bit about community. I want to talk a little bit about your experience of the community around gaming, all from the beginning to now, and how you've seen it change. But tell us a little bit about your experiences, like being involved in the gaming community and Gary Con, and just what that's meant to you.
Well, it's where a lot of my friends have come from. Rob Kuntz doesn't live in the U.S. anymore, but I've known Rob since 7th grade, and he pretty much helped Gary co-write D&D from Dave Arneson's notes. I am still very good friends with people I met at the University Gaming Club in 1973. Hi, David. Hi, Michael. These are people I still hang out with.
Yeah.
A few years later, hi, Jeff. It has built friendships that have lasted a lifetime. Thanks to Gary Con, I've reconnected with Luke and Ernie and Elise and Heidi and Cindy and their kids and even their grandkids, and now their brother Alex. I have people. And to reconnect with these people after all these years is great. And Gary's daughter Heidi and my sister Tina were best friends in grade school.
Oh, wow.
My sister says one of her fondest memories is sitting at their house on the old white leather sofa with Gary in the middle and Tina on one side and Heidi on the other, and Gary's got his arms around both of them, and all three of them are watching Bugs Bunny cartoons. And this has nothing to do with gaming. It has everything to do with community and family and friendship.
Right.
And the games are fun, but it's become so well, C.S. Lewis said friendship is based on common interest. But a good friendship will grow beyond simply that common interest. There's got to be something to strike the spark.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that the sort of...
Yeah. So for those I've never been to Gary Con. Tell us a little bit about what it's like both back in the day and now.
Well, Gary Con feels like 1973 or 1974, when it was 300 to 400 people, most of whom knew each other.
Yeah, you cut out for a second there, so I just want to make sure I understood what you said. I think you said that Gary Con now feels like GenCon did in 1973, 1974.
Yes.
So
in the early 70s, where even if you hadn't met these people in person, you read the same war game magazines and you'd seen their letters and articles, and you got the same fanzines, and it was a small community, and you knew it all. You knew all of them, and there's still a lot of that. Now it is a little bigger, about 2,000, but part of that includes Pathfinder Society and Adventurers League both run a lot of events there.
Okay.
And not in a bad way. It's just, it's kind of a separate thing. It's just, there's, if you're there for Adventurers League, you're there for Adventurers League. So even at 2,500, it still feels like a fairly small convention. You can know most of the vets and know a lot of the game masters. And you run into people that you played a game with the next year. It's like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
And it's one of the high points of my year. It really is. And there's a guy named Paul Stormberg, bless him and bless his colleague Kevin Maurice. They do this thing called Legends of Wargaming. And Paul built an old school sand table that's collapsible and portable. And he brings this portable sand table and 500 flippin' pounds of sand. He this sand table, and every year we run all these old school historical miniatures games on the sand table. So you can come to Gary Con and you can play Chainmail. And in fact, Jeff Perrin, hey Jeff, the co-author of Chainmail, the author of the original rules that became Chainmail, goes to Gary Con, and he runs Cavaliers and Roundheads, which is his English Civil War game. That was the first game TSR ever published. And you want to meet Ernie Gygax, you want to meet Tim Kask, you want to meet Jim Ward, here's your chance.
Yeah.
And they're all wonderful folks.
Right, sure. Yeah. And you told me I should come to Gary Con next year, and maybe I'll get to. Maybe I'll make that happen. I'd love to do it. It would be really special, I think, especially post pandemic to get. I just miss going to cons in general, and I feel so when you describe Gary Con, it reminds me of how I experienced this is a generational thing, maybe with the community of geek community, gaming community, is it reminds me so much of the first PAX East. I went to the first PAX East, and then when you hear people talk about like the original PAX too, but in my experience, I never went to the original PAX. I only went to PAX East, but I went to the first couple, and the first few PAX Easts were so small, and there were these sort of like, people who were like, you had the Penny Arcade people, and you had like people that, you followed on the internet for the things that they do or the games that they make or whatever. And, but when they were at PAX East, it was so small that they're just people, which of course they always are just people. But too often because of the internet and because you don't really know these people in real life, they become these looming figures in your mind, but really they're just people. And when you get to like interact in an environment where everyone's just together and everyone is just playing games on the same level and there to have the same, like you said, the C.S. Lewis idea of friendship, of both of you standing there facing the same thing, it makes you, there's an equalizing thing that happens there. And I think that's one of the reasons why people describe cons in that way. It's like, oh, me and this other person who I think is cool, we both like the same stuff and we bond over it. And it is a really cool experience.
Yep. And I've got people, one of the battles I run, Jeff Perrin used to show at GenCon the movie Alexander Nevsky, which is a Russian film about 1246, Battle of Lake Piepas, the people of Novgorod against the Teutonic Knights. So I run that battle every year.
Okay.
There are people who have played that battle 5 or 6 or 7 times, and every year and in between time they find more books and more sources and read more about it. and I'm watching the tactics year after year as they learn more about the armies, and everybody loves it.
It's so specific. It's so.
And Nathan hi Nathan, and I, every year Jeff runs Cavaliers and Roundheads, and the two of us always play, and he's always on the Puritan side, and I'm always on the Cavalier side. And I always make sure to untie my ponytail so my hair is flowing loose. And Jeff calls me King Charles. And this has been going on for years.
Right.
It is such a treasure.
Yeah.
It is such an absolute treasure. And it's fun. It's not like, I spend most of my time playing war games, and it's not like I win them all by any means, but if the play is good, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And the one where I did win, I remember, it's Napoleon naval, ships, and I'm chasing a smaller French ship, and I chased him for like 3/4 of the game, and finally, took last mast off so he couldn't move, and then he, struck his colors and surrendered. And he said, and the player said, I hope that wasn't too frustrating. And I said, are you kidding? It was great. You were magnificent. It's no fun to play against somebody who's no good. That's, and if he'd have managed to get away from it, more power to him. And that's a big chunk of the fun too. Like, just, and that builds community. And, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to describe. And in 80, you're talking about small cons. I went to the first ever Panopticon USA, which is a Doctor Who convention. And I think there were like 85 people there. But the guests were and Turner. Nope, looks like we've lost some signal or something.
No, I think we're back. Can you hear me? You broke up there for a second. Say about.
Well, just, Panopticon, it was like maybe 150 people. And there's John Nathan Turner and Peter Davidson. In this, and I mean, you can just sit down and, sit down at the bar with them and talk.
Yeah.
Especially if you buy them a drink first.
Right. So we got a comment in the chat to ask you about rocket ships ! And I have no idea what that is, so I have to ask you about that.
Okay, rocket ships ! And I would like to make it clear that the words it's not rocket ! The words ! are part of the title.
Yes, it is typed out in the chat, so people can see it there. Yeah.
Sure. It is not science fiction. It has nothing to do with science. And for years, I think I designed my first spaceship game back in 1975.
Okay.
And I was never happy. And then 4 or 5 years ago at Gary Con, I played a game called World War Tesla by Fat Dragon Games, written by Tom Tullis and James Ward. And it basically take a World War I tank and put a giant Tesla death ray on top of it. And, that's World War Tesla. And, Tom's explaining the rules, and he said, okay, this is your maximum movement range. You can move in any direction you want, and you can end the turn facing in any direction you want. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And so that was the impetus that finally let me, that notion of don't worry about complex movement rules is what made, then I sat down and whacked out the rules in an afternoon. And, not counting the ship sheets, the rules are like 1,100 words. And it is thoroughly tongue-in-cheek, but see, in World War Tesla, you have a certain number of dice that you can allocate as bonuses.
Okay.
And so as I've said, I stole the movement and initiative wholesale. I mean, borrowed and inspired by World War Tesla.
Uh-huh.
And so, initiative, you roll a 6-sider, you have a certain number of bonus dice. You don't add them together, but you take the highest one. So it shifts your odds. So there is some strategy and there is some actual gameplay there. I've run 3 or 4 play tests so far, and there's definitely a game there.
Okay.
There is. But, the setting I put it in, okay, there's like 4 or 5 factions. There's the Solar Alliance, and there's the Republic of Terra, and there's the Spiders from Mars, and there's the Jovian Empire, and there's the glorious and eternal kingdom of Uranus. And, first time I ran into Gary Gygax, I said, okay, you guys are the Solar Alliance. Let me hear an Upsal. I said, okay, you guys are the glorious eternal kingdom of Uranus. Let me hear an Up Uranus.
Oh, you cut out maybe at the right time. I don't know, depending on where that story was going to go. Well, so you've...
And, the weapons are like, the disintegrator ray, or the Zorch gun, or the electrophrandibulizer.
No, I really like that tongue-in-cheek style, not taking itself too seriously, sense of humor with things. In fact, it just reminds me a little bit of the D&D type world that Josh runs. Right now he's running I've gotten to play in it. It's a fantasy world that's very tongue-in-cheek like that, and I got to. It's very Zork-esque, and I got to play in it for a podcast, and then he's running it right now on the Worst Days Twitch stream on Tuesday nights, and I really enjoy it. But I'm wondering, I don't know how many folks we have in All Ports Open Network related who are into miniature games or what it takes to run your game, but if you're looking for more people to play test it, maybe we can help you get it out there for folks who want to check it out.
That would be great. Part of the object is I wanted it to be simple.
Yeah.
Like I said, the rules are just under 1,100 words. It's meant, and it plays in about an hour.
So what do you need to play? What do you need to go into it?
You need something that represents spaceship. One should be about that long, the other should be about that long. I happened to find a couple of free spaceship files that a friend of mine 3D printed for the bigger ships, and for the little ships I went on eBay and they had a bunch of rocket ship erasers about that long, and I got a bag of 10 rocket ship erasers for $10, and those are my small ships. So and you could get by with something drawn on a piece of paper. That's awesome.
That sounds really cool.
And it's a lot of fun, and the king of that kind of game, and you can meet him at GaryCon too, is a gentleman named Tom Wham. And he is a genius at games with an amusing setting, but a really fantastic gameplay.
Okay.
And he did I think his first one was called Snit Smashing, where you're the one creature's trying to and there's another one called Snit's Revenge, and Awful Green Things from Outer Space, and King of the Tabletop, and they're all very whimsical and tongue-in-cheek. Yet the actual gameplay, if you filter out the tongue-in-cheek element, the gameplay will keep you interested. He's a genius at that.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap us up here for this episode, but I wanted you to help me introduce, set up next week, because I have my guest next week happens to be someone you know. So we have Derek White coming on next week, you've known him in this community that you're talking about for a little while. Am I right?
Yeah, I've known Derek 7-8 years, somewhere in there. He's a Methodist minister and calls himself the Geek Preacher, and he's a little younger than I am, which makes for a very interesting dynamic, because he was in the thick of it in the 80s with the whole satanic panic. D&D is satanic.
Right.
Whereas, in 1980, I was 25 years old, and I'd been married for 4 years. So, did we just cut out there?
No, you're good. Sorry. It's me trying to tell my dog to not bark, and
okay, no
while
problem.
not...
But,
Go ahead.
I was enough older that, I was 25 years old. I was married, what somebody says on TV I didn't care about. You know, I was not a churchgoer at the time, but if I had been and somebody was saying, you know, this game is satanic, it's like, you know what? No, it's not.
Right.
You know, let's sit down together and actually read what it says.
Yeah.
And so that was never part of my gaming experience.
Well, we'll see if some of that comes up with him next week. I don't know. I know we are going to talk about inclusion at the table. He's a big advocate for inclusion of LGBTQIA people and neurodiverse people, and so I think we're going to talk about a lot of that next week and how that flows out of theology.
And again, I never turned anybody away from my table. And somebody said, well, what do you think of a non-heterosexual character? It's like, whatever. The kind of games I run are more about the adventure and less about deep you played my game.
Sure.
It's like, the two guys who run the armory shop, are they a couple or not? Well, who cares? I'm here to buy a helmet.
Yeah. Although I think it's fun when you start introducing that kind of stuff into your games. Well,
and I'm not,
sure.
Just my emphasis is just
sure. Well, Michael, I want to thank you so much for coming on Holy Happy Hour Batman, and I'll have to, maybe we can get you back on sometime in the future. If you'd come back on, we can talk a lot. There's so much more we could talk about. An hour doesn't have time.
I'd love to. After, if you want to lose complete control, you could have Derek and I on at the same time.
We almost did that this week, but it didn't end. Scheduling didn't really work out.
I think it would be kinder to your audience to subject them to us separately first.
There you go. Well, that's a good goal then. If Derek comes on next week and isn't miserable, maybe he'll come back on and the three of us can chat more about community and sort of the gaming community, and also how that intersects with sort of our spirituality, which is probably pretty similar between the three of us. And but it's been a blessing.
When I
go ahead.
When I tease him sometimes about some piece of liturgy or the other, he just says, well, I'm a Methodist flavored Episcopalian. So.
Okay. There you go. I know we can have a bunch of those lame churchy jokes that we appreciate and other people don't. But Michael, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Thank you for making the time to do it.
It's been an honor to be here. Thanks for asking.
And folks, if you all want to find Michael out there, probably the best way to do that would be to go to GaryCon and find him in the flesh.
There you go. Or you can always sign on to the GaryCon Facebook page. And I promise Luke and Caroline I won't make any trouble.
There you go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. And thank you all out there for watching Holy Happy Hour Batman. Like I said, next week, Friday at 5, once again, we'll be back here. We've got Derek, the Geek Preacher, the so-called chaplain of GaryCon White, is going to be on the show, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of things, including inclusion at the table, and inclusion at the Lord's table probably, and whatever else happens to come up in these chats. And then, like I said at the beginning of the show, I'm going to have 2 weeks of family stuff that'll take us offline for 2 weeks, but we'll be back on May 28th with James D'Amato, the founder of One Shot Network and the One Shot Podcast and Campaign Pod. And I think we're going to be talking a little bit about the stuff he's doing with religion on this season of Campaign. And I'm really excited about having James on the show. So go to allportsopen.com where you can find all the stuff we do at the All Ports Open Network and watch shows like this one and all of our other Twitch shows that we do. So, all right, everyone. I hope you all have a great weekend. And whatever's left of happy hour, enjoy it.
Next bat, same bat time, same bat channel.
I should just start saying that at the end of the show. Exactly. And hopefully I won't get sued. So cheers.
Oh, we'll see you later.